Hi, it's Charlton from the Quartet, and this is an Angel Island bonus episode featuring Ed Tepporn, Executive Director of the Angel Island Immigration Station Foundation. Ed shared so much insight into both the history of Angel Island and the cultural ramifications of current immigration policy in the United States. We only just scratched the surface in our final edits for the season. So in this clip, we are exploring the deeper nuances of this ongoing national conversation and Ed's vision for a more inclusive and just future. If you haven't had a chance to hear parts 1 through 4 of Angel Island already, I encourage you to scroll back and listen to the full story. And of course, if you're in the San Francisco Bay Area, I recommend planning a visit to the immigration station on Angel Island. You can learn more at aiisf.org, linked for you in the episode description in your listening app. And now, here's my conversation with Ed.
First of all, Charlton, thank you so much to you and the rest of the Del Sol Quartet for all that you've done and for this opportunity to be in conversation together. As the executive director of the Angel Island Immigration Station Foundation, it has been such a privilege and an honor and a huge responsibility to think about how we're continuing to lift up these histories connected to Angel Island, but partner with organizations and companies like yourself to find new ways to reach new audiences. It's so true, right, that a lot of people, unfortunately, are not familiar with Angel Island's history. And sometimes Angel Island is referred to as the Ellis Island of the West. It indeed was the largest immigration station here on the West Coast in operation from 1910 to 1940. But what's important to remember about Angel Island was that it was created to serve as a detention center to enforce the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, as well as other exclusionary immigration policies that truly sought to keep Asians and Pacific Islanders from entering the U.S. So there were about 500,000 people from 80 different countries, the majority of those immigrants from Asian and Pacific Islander countries who were processed or detained at Angel Island in the 30 years that it was open. And today the site serves as a National Historic Landmark and a symbol of diverse experiences of detention, of racism, of exclusion, but also of determination and hope. And that's the work that we've been doing at the Angel Island Immigration Station Foundation for the past 40 years, which is to preserve the histories of these individuals who came through Angel Island by preserving the buildings and ensuring that more people become familiar with the stories that their journeys represent.
How do you imagine this incredibly important story entering the more mainstream American culture?
There's been so much work over the past 40 years by so many different people and so many different community activists and descendants of people who were detained or processed on Angel Island to ensure that more people know about Angel Island, but the work definitely continues. I think there's a couple of different things that will be important to ensure that every single child and adult in the U.S. recognizes Angel Island's history and its importance to our country in terms of reminders of a period when we actively sought to keep specific groups of people out and how we can potentially learn from those experiences in order to imagine a more inclusive and equitable future. For me, one of the most important ways is ensuring that Angel Island's history gets taught in our schools, not just in the Bay Area, not just in California, but across all of the entire nation. And that is going to take a lot of advocacy work to change curriculum standards in terms of what's taught, not only about Angel Island, but also about other moments in Asian and Pacific Islander history, as well as the histories of so many marginalized and disenfranchised communities. All of these histories truly deserve to see the light of day. And there's so much that we can learn about each other and how we can develop a better sense of understanding and empathy for the different communities that are part of the diversity of this country that we live in. I think another piece that continues to be important is the poetry that was carved by the Chinese detainees into the walls of the detention barracks. And there have been many efforts over the years, first by him, Mark Lai and Judy and Genny with their book Island, which translated those poems written into Chinese into English so that all of us can have a moment to understand the words, the emotions, the experiences that are carved into the detention barracks walls. That work has subsequently been followed up by Dr. Charles Egan at San Francisco State University with his most recent book, Voices. And that book looks at some of the other inscriptions that are located in the building and helps to translate and bring those stories and emotions to life. So the poetry truly is a way of connecting with these histories, these stories, and our hope is to continue to ensure that more people have an opportunity to recognize the poetry, to understand the poetry, and hopefully come and visit the site for themselves to see the poetry, to learn about the history of Angel Island, and to experience the emotion that you get walking within the hallways and within the rooms of the former detention barracks. There truly is no replacement for learning about this history, where it happened, and being able to not only learn about that history, but to feel the history of what the site represents. And then the final piece truly is the collaborations we have with artists like Del Sol Quartet and Lenora Lee and so many others who help to take these poems and these histories and these stories, these very real individual experiences, and to create art and performance that allows people to hopefully feel that history and develop more empathy for the journeys that immigrants then and now travel.
Yeah, when we made the premiere on Angel Island, I remember everybody remarking how when the singers began to sing the words that we could actually see on the walls, that we felt like the spirits were actually coming out of the walls and in a sense, feeling acknowledged, feeling cherished, and being able to share their stories almost 100 years later. And I think that was very, it was spine tingling for us. And obviously you're on the island a lot more than we are, I think. And what's it like for you stepping into that space on a regular basis and feeling perhaps the weight of that history or the magnitude and significance of the history and the cultural ramifications of what happened there?
Well, when I had the chance to be in the space and hear performances like Del Sol, I distinctly recall feeling that spine tingling and that goosebumps on my skin. So that's one set of feelings for sure. I think part of what people experience when they come to visit Angel Island oftentimes also is impacted by how many people are there, what the weather is like, what their own personal immigration or immigrant heritage story might be. And so I've been on the island when there was no one else around. And there is definitely a sense of walking on hallowed ground in terms of recognizing that, yes, the name of the site is the Angel Island Immigration Station, but that kind of hides the fact that this was a former detention center. This was a site where people were detained for days, weeks, months, even years. The longest detention on Angel Island was by a woman named Kwok Shi, who was detained on Angel Island for almost 2 years. So when you're there on the site and it's a little bit empty, or I think visitors do have the opportunity to really connect with the darker and more complex emotions. And I've had the privilege of accompanying both people who were formerly detained on Angel Island, who are now in their 90s, as well as their descendants and families. And especially if you have a personal connection to Angel Island, it can bring up a lot of emotions because it was such a traumatic experience for so many people who were detained there. I've also been on the island when we've had 1,000 people on the site. For example, our in-person Family Day event. And there was something so incredibly powerful and uplifting about seeing a sea of diverse faces on the site who were sitting and actively engaging with the cultural and musical performances, dining on food that had been made by immigrant entrepreneurs, and then also connecting with the site itself and the histories and the exhibits. And there was a moment where I thought to myself, how powerful would it be if we had 1,000 visitors to the site every single day? In a given year, the site sees about 20,000 people per year. And when I think about how many visitors come to San Francisco and visit Alcatraz, or go to New York City and visit Ellis Island, that is such a drop in the bucket of the amount of visitation that a site that is so important and as important to our nation's history as Angel Island, to have only 20,000 visitors a year, that is not enough. And I and the rest of the Angel Island Immigration Station Foundation staff and board are truly committed to ensuring that we find new ways to bring more people to the site, to address some of the accessibility barriers of people visiting the site, and to ensure that when people come to visit the Angel Island Immigration Station, that every single person feels a deep sense of connection to the site and its history, but also uses that time on the island to reflect on their own experiences, their own friends and family, and hopefully to think about how they themselves might treat immigrants today, or how we as a community, as a nation, should be treating and welcoming immigrants so that we all collectively feel a sense of safety and belonging.
It's certainly incredibly relevant today, especially on our southern borders.
Right. I mean, I think that immigration becomes an issue only because of racism and xenophobia in terms of how countries and communities perceive immigrants. When we think about the history of the immigrants who came through Angel Island and the immigrants who are coming to the U.S. today, and immigrants who are making those similar types of journeys in other regions of the world, oftentimes, I think immigrants are stereotyped as being poor or dirty or disease-bearing. And with each era, it seems that we take those stereotypes and we project them on to new immigrant groups, when the reality is that when you are an immigrant, the reason that most of us immigrate is simply because we're seeking safety or hoping for new belongings or new opportunities. When you think about even the immigrants who came through Angel Island and their descendants today, who are leaders of Fortune 500 companies, who are educators, who are teachers, who are artists, or who are helping to provide very valuable services across multiple industries and service industries and restaurants and hotels. Immigrants are such an important part of any nation's economic engine. And my hope is that when people come and visit Angel Island and they learn about the stories of immigrants then and now, it gives them a little bit more of an understanding of both the challenges as well as the contributions that immigrants have made and will continue to make to this country.
What is the message that the history of Angel Island can bring for us now, looking ahead into the future?
The message that I think Angel Island represents is that there are important parts of our nation's history that still need to see the light of day. The stories connected to the detention and exclusion at Angel Island are unfortunately being repeated today all along the southern border. When we think about immigration then and now, there's so many parallels when we think about who our country decides is a good immigrant, right, that we want to allow in versus the bad immigrant that we don't want. And ultimately, what I hope Angel Island reminds us all of is there's no such thing as a good immigrant or a bad immigrant. Immigrants are individuals collectively who are simply moving from one place to another. There's different reasons for why an individual or family makes that decision to leave their homeland, and that's not always the easiest decision to make. But regardless of why they are leaving, the hope is that we learn from Angel Island's history and we think about our current day immigration policies and ensure that they are fair and just, and they treat people with equal opportunity to potentially become part of this nation. And it's also important to remember that immigrants are such an important part of the fabric of our nation. Immigrants have made amazing contributions over the course of time and will continue to make amazing contributions. And that's why we promote a message of belonging and inclusion at the Angel Island Immigration Station Foundation. We hope that everyone who visits the site or learns about the history remembers all these complexities of what immigrants have experienced, but also believes in a future where, regardless of where we were born or what language we speak or how we identify, that we all have the right to feel safe and to belong.
I think we were reading that for California in particular, about 50% of the people here have at least one parent who was born in another country. And so this state is a state of immigrants. It's a huge part of our legacy, and it is a huge part of our fabric of society here.
Definitely California and our nation is a state and a nation where we have many immigrants. And I also...
Or maybe we should say new immigrants.
New immigrants, right? Because it's also important to recognize that there were people who were here before the immigrants came, who were the original stewards of these lands, who have experienced so much genocide and so much loss because of our nation's policies. And I often start off my tours at Angel Island by recognizing that the Coast Miwok were the original stewards of the land that Angel Island sits on, or where the immigration station sits on. And in making that statement and making that acknowledgement, it's a reminder to myself that as much as I want others to learn about Asian American history and the history of Angel Island, it is just as important for me to continue to learn about the history of the indigenous peoples of our country, as well as other communities that I may not necessarily identify as being part of, but we all live in a capital C community. And the more that we can learn about each other's histories and current realities, the more of a chance we have to build a future where all of us feel included and feel that we have an equal opportunity at success, at thriving, at health. And that for me is a really beautiful future that is worth fighting for.
Sounds Current is a production of the Del Sol Quartet and the Del Sol Performing Arts Organization. Del Sol is Catherine Bates, Benjamin Creeth, Egan So-yoon, and me, Charlton Lee. This podcast is produced and edited by Andrea Klunder at the Creative Imposter Studios. Technical direction by Edwin R. Ruiz. Additional production support from Alex Riegler. Cover art by Felicia Lee. Our theme music was composed by me and performed by Del Sol Quartet. Angel Island was composed by Huang Ruo with generous funding from the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation, with additional funding from the Phyllis C. Wattis Foundation and the Clarence E. Heller Charitable Foundation. Special thanks to Andrea Fellows-Feinberg and Don Feinberg, who believe our stories are worth sharing. And thank you to all of our guests and collaborators in the ever-expanding world of Angel Island. You can find links to all of the resources and partners mentioned in this episode in the show notes in the episode description in your app and at delsolquartet.com/podcast. To learn more about Del Sol Quartet and the Angel Island Project, visit delsolquartet.com.